James Holzhauer and Ken Jennings were both contestants on Jeopardy at different times, and both had their own record-breaking runs on the show. Jennings went on a 74-match winning streak beginning in 2004 that netted him over $2.5 million as a result. Holzhauer broke the single-day winnings record in the show's history multiple times in his 32-game streak that reached the $24 million mark. Both are incredibly impressive, especially considering what Jeopardy is. There's a modicum of skill, like hand-eye coordination to time a buzz-in, but at its core, it's a trivia show that takes you into essentially every sector imaginable. Thus, it makes sense that Jennings and Holzhauer are very smart individuals. Jennings was a software engineer for a healthcare company and a captain on his Quiz Bowl team in college, while Holzhauer is a professional sports gambler who won multiple state competitions in math and science when he was in high school. They use their brains to make millions in an unconventional way, and they deserve to be recognized for their impressive play. Neither of these two boast the most miraculous feat in game show history, though. See, Jennings slowly grew his overall winnings with day-to-day chipping, and while Holzhauer went at a much more blistering pace, it was a 32-show process, and both simply needed to stay on their mental game. Still, neither holds a finger to what Michael Larson did in 1984. His game show appearance netted him a shade over $110,000, measly compared to the Jeopardy fellas, but at the time, the largest one-day total in game show history. Plus, Larson had a different hill to climb. Every time Jennings and Holzhauer stepped out for a game, their job was to beat two other contestants, and they did so at an astounding rate. When the ticker light came on for Larson to make his winnings, he was tasked with beating two other contestants and duping a famous host, a full production staff, and an entire television station while defying luck on a show named Press Your Luck. Larson had about an hour to do all of that, and he managed to pull it off. An ice cream truck driver jacked 6 digits right from out under a show theoretically designed not to let that happen. Press Your Luck is a pretty simple game to understand. 3 contestants begin with trivia questions at the start of the game before the entire stage turns around and the players head to the big board, filled with money and prizes. If the contestants answer well, they get more spins on the big board, so that means they get more chances to make some cash. I can't attest to the values in the current rebooted version of the show, but generally speaking, in this original version from the 1980s, contestants usually topped out around $10,000 to $20,000. There's plenty more money to be made, but the reason most stop before they even get close to marks like that are these little red freaks.
Stop it all!
These guys are called Whammies, and if a contestant lands on one during the big board segment, all of their earnings up to that point go away. One stroke of bad luck and they're back to square one. If a contestant is comfortable with their lead or doesn't want to risk losing what they have, they can pass their spins to another player who's required to take them. Usually it's a balancing act. They don't want to give their opponent too many spins because then they have the chance to catch up, but that also means they have more chances to lose it all. For Larson, it was anything but balanced, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Highest ever we've ever had!
His day started off plainly enough. Larson buzzed in an incorrect answer in the trivia round, so he faced the big board with the fewest spins of any contestant. However, on the board, there are spaces that award the contestant cash plus another spin. Theoretically, you could continue to hit these extra spins forever and keep raking in more and more money endlessly, and that is exactly what Larson planned to do. Well, technically anybody would try to do that, right? Maybe, but maybe not. You can pile up more cash, but the longer you're in front of that board, the longer you're at the mercy of those animated bandits swiping all your cash and moving you to the back of the standings. Larson started off his day by hitting a whammy in his first spin. Because he didn't have as many chances to spin, he wound up in last place heading into the second and final round of the game, so I'm sure he would have preferred to have a few more. But the only way he could guarantee that spins would mean more cash is if he could completely avoid the whammies. Boy, could he.
$4,000 in a spin! Stop! Stop it! $5,000 in a spin! Stop! Stop it! $1,000 in a spin! $12,000 Stop at Kauai. Stop! Stop at 4,000. Stop! Stop at 500 and spin. Stop! Gutsy, $700 and spin. Stop! $1,000 and a spin. Stop! Stop at 750 and a spin. Stop! 5,000 and a spin. Michael, 26,080.
The question and answer portion of the second round goes much more favorably for Larson here. He misses the first, but he buzzes in correctly on 2 different questions, so heading into the final big board, Larson is strapped with 7 spins. He spins first and gets on quite a run early. He hits a few of the money plus a spin boxes, but it's mostly innocuous at this point. The showrunners said that a whammy would typically show up around every 6 spins, and Larson was beyond that point, so those Red Devils were lurking. But that's all they would do. The game stops for a moment before Larson adds a couple thousand more dollars, pushing his total to the mid-20,000s, and the host, Peter Tamarkin, can barely believe that Larson is still going for it.
You have $28,000 more than Jamie. You're gonna go again. He's going again. He's unbelievable.
The chances of either of the other contestants getting as strong of a run as that without any whammies is minuscule compared to the chance of Larson hitting a whammy on his way. Of course, Larson wasn't exactly relying on chance. Spins in this game for every other contestant are like wearing flip-flops in the mud. You move one slow step at a time, carefully, and then you look to see if you're stuck or if you can take another move. Larson? Well, by comparison, he was driving an ATV.
Michael, I've never seen anyone press their luck like you are, and you are pressing your luck.
Larson racked up $102,851, and he still managed to pass away 4 spins. The next contestant, Ed, he hits a whammy on spin number 1. Janie's up next. She adds a couple $1,000 and decides to pass away her remaining 3 spins. That means Michael must take every single one of them unless he gets a whammy.
All right, Michael. I didn't want him. Can you handle him? Yeah.
I don't want him. He just made over $100,000 like it was nothing, but he doesn't want him? He takes his 3 spins, passes his extras to Janie, and Michael Larson walks away with $110,237. At this time, the most single-day winnings in American game show history. How'd he do it? Well, some of you folks may be astute enough to understand that the big board isn't exactly luck. Let's take a quick detour if you don't mind. Don't worry, this will tie in, I swear. Many of you have likely played or at least heard of Pokemon. It's the highest grossing media franchise in the world by a long shot. In Pokemon, your goal is to catch and train creatures and pit them against other trainers in battles throughout the land. When you're out in the wild trying to catch Pokemon, there is a very rare occurrence that can happen. You can run into what's called a shiny Pokemon. Shiny Pokemon are simply variants of regular Pokemon. In the older games, they were typically just color swaps, but I bet many of you that play these games have never actually encountered a shiny Pokemon. Well, other than the shiny Gyarados in Generation 2, that doesn't really count. That's because in older generations, you only had a 1 in 8,192 chance of finding one. If you ever went out roaming tall grass, hoping one would pop out in the wild, actually encountering one would basically feel random. Statistically, it's clearly not. If you ran a simulation of 1,000,000 random Pokemon encounters, you could reasonably guess how many shiny Pokemon will show up. But when you're playing the game, painstakingly running through fields or caves, praying that the Pokemon you love shows up as a shiny, it's a guessing game. The catch about chance in video games is that it isn't really chance at all. Computers cannot be truly random by their design. As MIT computer science professor Steve Ward puts it, quote, "On a completely deterministic machine, you can't generate anything you could really call a random sequence of numbers because the machine is following the same algorithm to generate them. Typically, that means it starts with a common seed number and then follows a pattern. Video games are really good at making something seem random, like finding a shiny Pokemon, for example, but if you knew the seed and the pattern and how to manipulate it, you could theoretically find as many shiny Pokemon as you wanted. In Press Your Luck, most contestants operate like any random Pokemon player running through grass searching for a shiny Pokemon, albeit with significantly different odds. But Michael Larson was not doing that. He knew the seed number and then followed the pattern, and at that point, all he had to do was execute the button presses. Larson was able to do this for two reasons. Number one, Press Your Luck didn't make it very hard to crack the code. Number two, well, he had a lot of time on his hands. Let's start with the game board. It has 18 spaces, and each space contains different amounts of money or prizes or whammies that pop up. The yellow lights that highlight the boxes have 5 different patterns they can go in. That's a bit of a low figure, but not necessarily a game breaker right off the bat. Memorizing 5 patterns is still relatively difficult, but the biggest problem is that it isn't that helpful. All that does is ensure you know where those blinking lights will end up. It doesn't mean you know what will be inside. The killer? 2 of the squares on the big board never contained a whammy and always had an extra spin attached to a cash prize. If you go around and number each square, numbers 4 and 8 are the golden spaces. So, Larson had to memorize the 5 patterns to be able to predict when the light would be in one of those squares, and boom, he knew he was going to win. If you watch the video knowing this information, it's awfully obvious because of how quickly Larson reacts after hitting the button. He doesn't even take a millisecond to read the square because it doesn't matter. He doesn't know exactly what he's getting, but he knows that as long as he hit number 4 or number 8, it isn't a whammy and he gets to keep spinning. Like I mentioned, he still needed the time and means to prepare for all this, and, well, his unemployment did him wonders. Larson had multiple TVs set up in the living room of his home to watch and analyze every game of Press Your Luck to learn his setup. It remains one of the most impressive game show appearances in TV history, and all it took was a guy who had too much time on his hands. But it almost wasn't the most impressive. I already pointed out how his first spin was a whammy. That one was a timing issue. He knew the patterns, but he clearly wasn't as focused, shouting out the typical big bucks no whammy thing all of the contestants normally do, and he needed a chance to feel out how long it would take for the buzzer to stop the light. Once he nailed that down, though, the only thing that could stop him was himself, and he nearly did. Over the course of his $100,000 run, Larson's face begins clenching up, he starts sweating more, and it's all because he knows that if he slips up even once, a whammy could be coming his way. This is exactly why he said, "I didn't want him," after he got those spins back. He needed to keep up his plan for 3 more spins, and he only did so on 2 of them. The first 2 spins go exactly as planned, squares 4 and 8. The final spin, the one that could have lost him over $100K, did not land on one of those 2 squares. It landed on the middle of the left side, the exact same square Larson hit his first whammy in. This time, he needed a little luck, and he got it. Instead of the Red Devil, he was taking a trip to the Bahamas. After Larson destroyed the show, the producers increased the number of patterns from 5 to 32, and the GSN documentary on the topic says that the then-modern reboot was Larson-proof and truly random. We know that's not actually true, but for a human to replicate the same strategy Larson did with so many more options, it's pretty proved. Larson was not necessarily known to be the greatest guy. His wife at the time left him shortly after his win, his kid resented him, and he was being sought out by a laundry list of government agencies for various endeavors. Perhaps the biggest kick in the teeth in the Press Your Luck sense was that a large portion of his winnings were stolen from him. Larson was trying to win a radio game show in which you had to match the serial number of a dollar bill to one from the station, so he withdrew nearly $50,000 from his bank account, all in singles, and when he and his wife left for a Christmas party one night, they returned to their back door being kicked in and all of the money gone. The documentary tries to paint Larson in a sour light with this stuff, and perhaps he wasn't the best guy. Regardless, he passed away from cancer in 1999. I'm not so focused on the man behind the actions, but rather the name and qualifications attached. Sure, guys like James Holtzauer and Ken Jennings had empirically better game show runs, but there's a certain magic behind an unemployed occasional ice cream truck driver pulling the wool over the eyes of an entire TV station and walking away with over $100,000 to show for it. That is the most impressive display of game show play ever. He broke luck, and he did it so well that even when he needed an inkling of it at the end of the game, luck bowed and said, "Okay, Michael."
When you had $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, why? What was in your mind? Why did you keep going?
Well, two things. One, it felt right. And the second was I still had 7 spins, and if I passed them, somebody could have done what I did. That was a lot of spins to pass, 7.